There was a kind of evening in Britain back in the 1970s that didn't feel special at the time because it happened almost every night, quietly repeating itself in houses up and down the country without anyone stopping to notice it. It began as daylight faded, not suddenly, but slowly, as the sky outside softened into grey and the house seemed to change its mood along with it, shifting from the chaos of the day into something calmer, heavier, and more predictable. These evenings were not planned or discussed, and they didn't revolve around entertainment or choice, but around routine, habit, and the shared understanding that after a long day, this was simply how things were done. If this feels familiar, or if it brings back the sound, the smell, or the feeling of being small in a warm room while the rest of the world went quiet, tap like, subscribe for more stories of Britain as it really was, and let us know in the comments what a normal evening looked like in your home. Number 1. Coming home as it gets dark. In many British households, the evening didn't begin at a specific time, but with the sound of a front door opening and closing, coats being shrugged off, and shoes being kicked just far enough into the hallway to count as put away. Parents arrived home tired rather than talkative, carrying the weight of the day with them in their posture, while children drifted in from school or from playing outside, already sensing that the energy of the house was changing. The light outside was dimmer now, street lamps beginning to glow, and curtains drawn not for decoration but for privacy and warmth, sealing the house off from the rest of the street. No one announced that the evening had started, but everyone felt it. Number 2. The smell of tea and something on the hob. Before anyone sat down, before the television was switched on, the evening announced itself through smell, the unmistakable combination of boiling water, warm plates, and something simple cooking on the hob. Meals were rarely elaborate, and they didn't need to be because tea was about fuel and routine rather than excitement, and everyone knew roughly what to expect without needing to ask. Saucepans clinked, kettles whistled, and the kitchen filled with steam as plates were laid out with quiet efficiency, often by one parent while the other changed clothes or settled briefly into a chair. Food appeared not as a surprise, but as part of the rhythm of the day, dependable and familiar. Number 3. Sitting down together, whether you wanted to or not. When the table was ready, everyone sat down, not because it had been negotiated or agreed upon, but because that was simply what families did. Children took their places where they always did, parents at the ends or sides, conversation limited and functional, focused more on eating than on sharing stories from the day. There was no background music, no phones, and no sense that the meal needed to be entertaining, because it existed to mark a transition from the working day into the quieter hours of the evening. Even silence felt normal here, filled only by the scrape of cutlery and the soft sounds of people eating together. Number 4. The living room becoming the center of the house. Once plates were cleared and cups rinsed, the evening moved almost automatically into the living room, a space that took on a different importance as the day drew to a close. Chairs were claimed, cushions rearranged, and the room slowly filled with the presence of the whole household, drawn together not by conversation, but by habit. This was the room that mattered now, the place where the evening would be spent, where time seemed to slow and the outside world faded into the background. Even children sensed the shift, lowering their voices and settling into quieter forms of play without needing to be told. Number 5. The television schedule deciding the evening. At the heart of the room sat the television, not as background noise but as the organizer of the entire evening, its schedule dictating what happened next and when. Programs were watched because they were on, not because they had been chosen, and everyone accepted this without question, planning their movements around broadcast times they had memorized without ever realizing it. There was no pausing, no rewinding, and no option to watch something later, which gave the evening a sense of structure that felt both restrictive and comforting. When the television was on, it had everyone's attention, and when it was off, the room felt noticeably quieter. Number 6. Children on the floor, adults on the sofa. The physical arrangement of the room told its own story, one that children understood instinctively, even if no one ever explained it. Adults settled onto sofas and armchairs, claiming the higher, softer seats, while children sat on the floor, leaning against furniture, sprawled on the carpet, or perched on footstools if they were lucky. This wasn't discussed or enforced, but accepted as part of the natural order of things. A subtle hierarchy reflected in where everyone sat and how much space they were given. From the floor, children watched television from a slightly different angle, close enough to feel included, but always a little bit lower. Number 7. Quiet rules you didn't notice at the time. As the evening unfolded, a series of quiet rules came into play. Rules that were never listed or explained, but followed all the same. You didn't talk over the news, you didn't keep getting up once you had sat down, and you didn't interrupt if something important seemed to be happening on the screen. Children learned quickly when to be silent and when it was safe to speak, reading the room rather than asking permission, adjusting their behavior to match the mood of the adults around them. At the time, this felt normal, even sensible, because everyone else was doing the same. Number 8. Small comforts that felt enormous back then. Despite the structure and the rules, evenings in the 1970s were filled with small comforts that took on an outsized importance in a child's memory. A biscuit handed over without ceremony, a glass of squash placed beside you, or a blanket pulled up over your legs as the room cooled, each one a quiet gesture of care. These moments weren't announced or framed as special, but they softened the evening, making it feel safe and contained, a world in miniature where nothing much was expected of you. Looking back, it's often these small details that linger longest. Number 9. Parents unwinding in their own way. As the evening progressed, parents began to unwind, though not in ways that would later be labeled as relaxation or self-care. One might read a newspaper, folding and refolding the pages with practiced ease, while another sat quietly with a cup of tea, lost in thought or watching the television without really seeing it. There was little talk of feelings or stress, just the shared understanding that the day was done and that this quiet time was earned. Children sensed this too, instinctively giving adults space, aware that the evening belonged to them now as much as it did to the family as a whole. Number 10. The sound of the house settling. As the hours passed, the house itself seemed to settle into the evening, filling with familiar background sounds that blended together into something comforting. The low hum of the television, the ticking of a clock, the soft hiss or knock of heating pipes, and the occasional muffled sound of neighbors through thin walls. These sounds became the soundtrack of the evening, unnoticed at the time but deeply embedded in memory, signaling that all was well and that nothing unexpected was about to happen. It was the sound of normality, repeated night after night. Number 11. Bedtime approaching without discussion. Eventually, without any formal announcement, the evening began to draw to a close, signaled by routines that everyone recognized instantly. Pajamas were fetched, teeth brushed in a familiar order, and lights dimmed as children were guided upstairs, not through negotiation, but through expectation. There were no long conversations about how tired you felt or whether you wanted to stay up, because bedtime was simply the next step in the evening, as inevitable as the sun setting outside. Parents tucked children in with brief words or gestures, efficient but reassuring, before returning downstairs to reclaim the quiet. Number 12. Falling asleep, knowing tomorrow would be the same. Lying in bed, children drifted off to sleep with the comforting knowledge that tomorrow would follow much the same pattern as today, predictable and steady. There was security in that repetition, in knowing what came next, and in understanding the rhythm of the household even if you couldn't yet explain it. Sleep arrived not with excitement or anticipation, but with acceptance. The day neatly folded away, ready to be repeated again. For many, this quiet certainty became one of the defining feelings of childhood. These evenings were not remarkable at the time, and that is exactly why they mattered, shaping a generation through routine, repetition, and shared space rather than grand moments or dramatic events. They taught children how to wait, how to observe, and how to fit into the rhythm of family life, absorbing lessons without ever realizing it was happening. Remembering them now is less about nostalgia and more about understanding how ordinary moments quietly leave the deepest marks, evening after evening, in homes that felt unchanging, even as the world outside slowly moved on.